As it is 4:30 p.m., we will start our event like the usual PIC tradition. Before we begin, I will request all participants to please keep video and microphones on, off, or mute mode. Any questions and comments may please be shared using the Zoom chat option to everyone anytime during the dialogue. We will consolidate these questions for the Q&A discussion. This session will be recorded for sharing on other platforms. Thank you for joining us today. We welcome you to this online economics roundtable organized by the Energy, Environment and Climate Change, that is the EECC group of Pune International Center. PIC is a think tank in its 10th year, which focuses on public policy research and advocacy in diverse areas like technology, social innovation, governance, national security, social sciences, as well as energy, environment, and climate change and climate action. The ECC vertical, led by Professor Amitav Malik, was started in 2018. We focus on climate policy and outreach and published a policy paper this year, making Pune metropolitan region carbon neutral by 2030, a policy roadmap. To mark the World Environment Day 2020, we organized a web dialogue on 6 June on the topic of how to align post-COVID economic aspirations with climate change concerns to find win-win economic solutions. Under the aegis of PIC, Climate Collective Pune, a group of like-minded experts and professionals from diverse backgrounds, was also started in 2018. Uh, just to remind for people who join now, we are also running a poll to know the consensus and views of people who are interested in environment, economics, and climate change. So please do share your views through the poll. We will now begin with the discussion. Today's topic is interrelationship between economic performance and environmental stability, and which focuses on finding an integrated climate economic policy for our economic, social, and environmental well-being. I will now introduce the distinguished speakers who have joined us for this dialogue. Dr. Anupam Saraf is an environmentalist, professor, future designer, a board and advisory member of global organizations supporting sustainable development and systems design. Dr. Priyadarshini Karve is director of Samuchit Envirotech and the national convener for Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change, that is INEC. Dr. Ishita Ghoshal did her PhD from Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune, and is the assistant professor at Ferguson College in Economics. Dr. Gurudas Nulkar is professor and heads the Strategy and General Management Department at Symbiosis Center for Management. He is a trustee and faculty at the Ecological Society, Pune. Professor Amitav Malik, a founder member and trustee of Pune International Center, is the convener for today's Climate Economics Roundtable. A Padma Shri awardee for his work in laser technology, Professor Malik is a defense scientist who has been actively working in energy, environment, and climate change for almost 2 decades. I now request Professor Malik to commence this session with his introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. I hope I'm audible to all.
Yes, sir.
From my side, welcome to you all, particularly the distinguished panel who have agreed to grace this occasion and contribute. This is a very unique kind of a dialogue roundtable effort because we realized as environmentalists that whatever we may do, ultimately the economics has an upper hand. So we thought that we must also address the economics and they talk to economists and hope that economists will also want to talk to the environmentalists because now the things are changing. We are in a totally different new paradigm. And of course, we all remember that the climate economic relationship was highlighted way back in 2006 by no other than Lord Nicholas Stern. And since then, there have been a lot of things happening. And in my later discussion, I will bring out many things that have actually happened. But ultimately, we have to accept that mankind is actually already struggling in a climate challenged world. This is a new paradigm. For years, we have been told that there is an inherent conflict between economic growth, and environmental protection. But this is not right anymore. This is not true anymore. Thanks to technology and innovation, we can have we can now combine both and have sustainable economic performance as well as reducing um, climate risk. For instance, today solar photovoltaic plus battery put together is already cheaper than uh, fossil fuel. Also, every 100 kilowatt hour of solar energy generated actually is removing 1,000 kilowatt hour of generated, removing 1 ton of CO2, and so on and so forth. Things are changing. So today, thanks to technology, we can now do all this kind of things. Present model of GDP growth at the cost of Earth's resources is no more economically viable. Nothing to do with so much to environment, but the cost effectiveness of the fossil fuel um, industry itself is now coming into question. Again, Earth's environment getting warmer than 2 degrees centigrade is also not viable, not acceptable. And of course, we all know that any further global warming will certainly destabilize the environment irreversibly, and some of these changes may be permanent. And those recoveries, of course, will cost huge amount of money, cost. So, a reliable document report says every US dollar invested today on proactive climate action will provide 5 times as much profit or gains in the um, by 2030, just 10 years. Then, of course, another dimension of this dilemma, society, climate change, economics, is the interrelationship, is the human health and well-being, particularly for the young generation of today and of course in the future. If Earth's environment is not stabilized quickly, it would shrink the comfort zone of mankind, and normal life will be dominated by struggle for survival, which of course will have no margin for economic progress. In fact, this is exactly what COVID-19 disruption has proved. So climate economic impacts will be also different for different nations and its people.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
It's indeed an honor and pleasure to be with you this evening. Uh, I'm going to take you through a little bit of wisdom of the last 50 years on the relationship between the environment and the economy before the other speakers talk about what we can do practically. So I think I would start off by pointing out that this investigation into the relationship between the environment and the economy is very old. And let's start in 1969, when the then Secretary General of the United Nations actually told, he said that I do not wish to seem over dramatic, but I can only conclude from the information that is available to me as Secretary General that the members of the United Nations have perhaps 10 years left in which to subordinate their ancient quarrels and launch a global partnership to curb the arms race and to improve the human environment, to diffuse population explosion, and to supply required momentum to development efforts. If such a global partnership is not forged within the next decade, then I very much fear that the problems I have mentioned will have reached such staggering proportions that they will be beyond our capacity to control. So if we look at this wisdom of 1969, it's no surprise that already a group of independent leading personalities were collected together by Aurelio Pecci, the Italian industrialist, and Dr. Alexander King, a Scottish scientist, in order to form what is known as the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome basically took to themselves to address what they called as global problematic. And global problematic was about really looking at problems which were beyond every quarter for industry and beyond every year or 10-year planning for governments across the world. So one of the first things that happened was that in 1970, Professor J. Forrester from the MIT made a presentation to the Club of Rome and proposed that they actually address the interlinkages between, or look at the interlinkages between the world population and the world industrial growth and agriculture using a computer model. The Club of Rome accepted the proposal, and once the proposal was accepted, Professor Dennis Meadows and Donella Meadows went on to lead a team of scientists which were drawn from across the world to create a model which came to be known as the World 3 model. The World 3 model is basically a model which modeled the growth of population, and in relation to the growth of population, what would be the expansion of industry or industrial output, and as a consequence also the agricultural production. And along with that, what would be the resource consumption and consequent pollution. So this exercise of putting the world on a computer and trying to analyze the relationships between these various parts, what was done by this team, and they investigated this relationship for a 200-year period between 1900 and 2100 using 12 scenarios. What they did was they basically alerted the world to the dangers of dynamics of exponential growth. And the book which they wrote subsequently, The Limits to Growth, came to be an international bestseller in terms of drawing the world's attention to the problems of resource use and resource management, and what came to be called as an overshoot and collapse scenario, or a limits to growth scenario for the world. So amongst the 12 scenarios, I'm going to show you quickly just 2 scenarios for want of time. So one of the scenarios which assumed that we had more non-renewable resources than actually that we have showed that the population gradually at the rates that existed in from 1900 would continue to grow, and it would grow exponentially. And as it grew exponentially, industrial output, which is the dashed line, would also grow exponentially because the population would require industrial output. And as a consequence of the population growth, we also need more food. It also expanded. And as food supply grows exponentially, what happens is that both because of food and industrial output increasing, our resource base starts declining as we start using up resources. As a consequence, we also increase pollution. And then at some point of time, because there is insufficient resource now, or because the pollution or the environment has an impact, the population suddenly stops growing and collapses completely, as also does industrial output and the agricultural production. So amongst the scenarios that they explored, scenario 9 is one which they explored, where they tried to see if there are what are the possibilities of stabilizing population, stabilizing industrial output and agricultural output. So if we look at the world today, it is growing tremendously in terms of exponential growth all over the place. If we look at how long will our resources last, it basically indicates that most of our resources will not last more than in double digits at current rates of consumption. So the main conclusion of this study in 1972 was if present rates continue, then we are most likely going to have an overshoot and collapse scenario. When this study was published, there was obviously a denial. First, everybody said there are no limits. Then they said they may be, but they are far away. Then they said technology will solve the problem. When technology could not solve the problem, they started saying that markets will solve the problem. Then people are now gradually realizing that markets don't always work. And in any event, some of them say, well, we can't do anything about it, so don't worry. So in 1987, the next big development took place, and that's in the form of the World Commission on Environment and Development, where I think the biggest insight that they provided was the environment is where we all live, and development is what we do in attempt to improve the way in which we can live within the environment. So it's obvious that we cannot do development at the cost of environment, because environment is the whole world in which we live. And so I think this is the most important insight that we need to carry forward when we are looking at the relationship between environment and the economy. Amitav has already shown you this particular diagram of the economy as being a subset of the society, and that being a subset of the environment. Obviously, we cannot expand the economy to take over or become larger than the environment. And the more we expand the environment and protect the environment, the more we will be able to grow society or grow the economy. So primarily, it's important for us to recognize that we need to ensure that we grow the environment. So what are the indicators of overshoot? These were already visible in the 1990s, and therefore more than 1,600 scientists from across the world came together and issued a warning to humanity, saying that we do need to make sure that we protect our environment and ensure that it is not going to be an irreversible scenario. In 2004, the team of Limits to Growth revisited the model that they had done in 1972, and they realized that there had been no significant changes in the way in which population was growing or industrial production was growing across the world. And therefore, much of what they had talked about in 1972 was actually on track. As per the business as usual scenario. They also said that basically now, instead of just trying to slow down, we will have to back our economy down to levels which are maybe 20 or 30 years ago. We cannot grow at the pace at which we have grown over the last 30 years anymore, because we are too late at doing it. So this was again the conclusion that they had during 2004. So what are the indicators of overshoot? So there are several indicators of overshoot. Amongst the prime is basically the deterioration of the environment and renewable resources, which we are seeing all around us. Surface water, groundwater, the disappearing rivers, disappearing streams, lakes, forests. That's a sign of overshoot. Along with basically the instability of our natural ecosystems, where we see weather patterns which are extreme. We also see increasing gaps between the rich and the poor. We see rising levels of pollution. So many of the indicators of overshoot are already being seen by us around us right now. So if we look at the scene today, the scale of human activities has grown tremendously since the last 50 years that I have been talking about. And the world population and industry have continued to grow exponentially. The global systems have overshot, and we already see decline in many countries across the world. So, what would a sustainable society look like in this kind of a scenario? What do we really need to do? There are at least four key things that we need to focus on doing. Firstly, we need to protect our environment and natural resources if we were to talk about the economy surviving, or in fact, society surviving itself. The next thing we need to do is we need to be able to manage the growth and slow it down, and maybe even have, in some countries, degrowth. It's important for us to also see that we need to redesign our informational, social, and institutional mechanisms. Uh, we also need to shift our perspectives. Most of us tend to be focused on next few hours today, especially in this world of social media, and we tend to be focused around our own lives. Few of us are focused over the next few weeks and over our family. Fewer people still worry about the next few years and about the community at large. Increasingly, I think we need to move towards thinking about our children's lifetime, a longer time span than we normally think about. And we need to think globally rather than simply locally, because most of the problems we are confronted with are now increasingly global. So I want to end by quoting the ancient wisdom from the Red Indians in the United States. So all things are connected, like blood which unites one and all. What befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Anupam sir, for that insight and such like a big history and accommodating it in a short time. I now request Priya ma'am to share her views on the energy aspect. Thank you.
Thanks, Aditi. I'm just sharing my screen.
Yes, ma'am, sure. Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to specifically focus on renewable energy and how it is available already to everyone. But before I go into that, I'll touch upon something which both the speakers before me have already talked about, but in a slightly different way. If we look at how the economic activity of humans have developed, it started with renewable energy, with biomass, water, wind. The discovery of petroleum and coal allowed it to sort of amplify in a very short time, and that is the modern economic activity that we talk about, which has been in the 19th century mostly driven by profit. It was exploitative of both people and the planet. That's the imperialistic economic activity, basically. In the 20th century, we sort of realize that we need to be a bit more proactive towards protecting the rights of the people, and that's how human rights and labor laws and all of these ideas started coming in. So economic activity tried to be people friendly. It didn't quite get there, but at least there was an attempt to do that. But the planetary resources continued to be exploited, and that is where we see this conflict arising, that there was this tacit assumption that if we want to develop, and that development at that point in time included both economy and society, If we have to develop, then we have to sacrifice the environment. If we want to protect the environment, we will have to sacrifice development. That was a sort of a tacit assumption, and that is what led to a lot of conflict throughout most of the 20th century. But in 21st century, new ideas have emerged, and that is what Anupam also referred to just before me, that now the economic activity is being forced to not only try to be people friendly but also to be planet friendly, because everybody now realizes that unless we manage to do that, we are not going to be able to sustain the human civilization as it stands now. So that's the challenge of 21st century. And therefore, when we talk about environmentalism now today in 21st century, it sort of assumes this reality. That is the point I want to stress upon, that environmentalism in the 20th century was always projected as if it is anti development, but the environmentalism or green in 21st century is mindful of the fact that we need to be planet friendly, people friendly economic activity. That is what green means in 21st century. So there is actually no conflict. The only conflict that exists in people's minds are those people who are still in the 20th century as far as the mindset goes. So keeping that in mind, if we look at the energy dilemma of this century, we have to think about two things. One is that climate change demands, and we have all globally agreed that we want to be consuming zero fossil fuel energy by 2100. That's the basic agreement under Paris Agreement. But at the same time, we also realize that we must address energy security. Everyone must have affordable access to at least a minimum level of energy service required for a respectable quality of life. So these are the two imperatives as far as energy systems is concerned. Unfortunately, the interventions that continue to happen in this field, I mean, everybody realizes that renewable energy is the way to go if we want to be climate friendly. And we try to sort of meet the energy requirements of everyone also. However, the interventions are not really yet along the 21st century lines. What is happening right now is that I'll take the example of electricity system. We have a system where we have mostly coal fired power plants. We have a grid in which that power goes, and then it gets distributed everywhere, and then there are end users. We are not dismantling this system. We are only trying to change the generation bit, where we, instead of coal fired power plant, we go for some kind of a renewable energy based power generation, which could be a wind farm, solar farm, etc. However, because of the differences in the nature of fossil energy and renewable energy, these systems require a much larger space and therefore cause other environmental impacts while addressing climate change. Also, because of the intermittent operation, until we have really good energy storage systems, there seems to be a tacit assumption that this system will continue to be driven by fossil energy with renewable energy as an add-on, so that this intermittency will get taken care of. But that is not going to take us to zero fossil energy system if we continue along these lines. So what we need to do actually is discard the existing energy system and rebuild from scratch. Step is what I call energy efficiency, but we haven't really put too much thought into sufficiency. To take the example of LED lighting, LEDs provided a very efficient lighting system, but then what we have been doing is we are now using more lighting. We haven't really reduced electricity consumption for lighting. So sufficiency requires that we are mindful of what are our real needs and keep our energy service use to our needs while using highly efficient equipment and processes. So that is step number one. And second step has to be decentralized renewables and focused on energy services. So again, I'm starting from the example of electricity, local microgrids powered by and energy storage, which is now maturing. This will be a climate friendly system, and this will supply to a local cluster of end users, which in itself sort of guarantees that there will be equitable distribution. There are actually existing models in some European countries where communities as a cooperative are running their own electricity generation for their own use, which ensures equitable access. So these are the kind of systems that we need, with the grid increasingly taking the place of backup. Today we are thinking of renewable energy as the backup. Renewable energy has to become the core and decentralized renewable energy, whereas the grid that we have should increasingly take the place of a backup. We don't only use electricity. Motive power is another form of energy that we need. I'm just taking the example of transport here. We can have long and short distance public transport as the core of mobility, powered by decentralized renewables, which will involve solar electric as well as biofuels from waste. We don't need to have energy plantation to make biofuels. And a short distance transport has to be focused on non-motorized modes, that is walking, cycling, etc., and at the most solar electric vehicles. This will require also changing the road and rail and all the transport network that also needs to be dismantled and rebuilt. The third form in which we use energy is heat. There also waste to biofuel systems can play an important role. Again, decentralized, neighborhood based, and rooftop solar thermal will support that mainly for heating, cooling, cooking, low energy applications. So, electricity, motive power, heat, these are the three forms in which we use energy, in each of which decentralized renewables focused on what energy services need to be delivered will play an important role. If with these two steps, sufficiency and dismantling the existing systems and rebuilding new systems, will take us towards zero fossil energy future. Many people have this apprehension that do we have the capacity to generate enough energy to replace the fossil energy that we are using. These are just some numbers. In 2020 we are using about 16 terawatts per year. Out of that, 13 comes from fossil fuels. By 2050 we will be using double of this. And Paris agreement, if we want to stay on track for Paris agreement goals for 2100, half of this, that is 16 terawatts, will have to come from renewables. So the total energy that the world uses today, that much energy will have to come from renewables by 2050. Is this possible? So this is our target, 16 terawatt per year from renewables. Even if we look at the total potential of only solar energy, this is the theoretical potential. All the sunlight that is falling on Earth can give us 7,500 terawatts of electricity, plus 5,600 terawatts of heat, plus 2,500 terawatts of fuel in the form of biomass growing using that solar energy and so on. So this is theoretical, of course, but even 10% of this is far more than what we need. So, and then there is also wind, there are other renewable energy sources. So the point here is that we have enough renewable resource to provide our energy needs, not just in this century but for many many centuries to come. But why don't we see this happening aggressively? I mean, in front of these numbers, all countries, including India, is talking at the most about a few hundred gigawatts to be generated with RE in the next few decades and so on. These are very tiny targets. Under Paris Agreement, India has committed to 40% of our total energy coming from renewables, which we are going to we are going to overachieve, in the sense that we have set that target for 2030, but we are likely to achieve that by 2022 or 23. That's not something to be proud of. that actually shows that we are not being ambitious enough, even though we have the capacity to be ambitious. So that's actually something to be rectified and not something to be proud of. So why don't we see this aggressiveness in spite of the numbers clearly showing that it is possible to move aggressively and very fast from fossil energy to renewables? Very simple reason: lack of political will. And political will to do this doesn't exist because politics across the world is funded by fossil fuel industry. So that's actually the solution. And as voters, it is in our hands to implement that solution. We should vote only for those parties which take on ambitious targets for renewable energy and refuse to take funding from fossil fuel energy. Then we will see the world getting on track. This is a matter of survival, so radical measures will have to be taken. We can't be complacent. So I'll stop there. um, uh, uh, Basically my message is that we can go 100% renewables even now with existing technologies in the next few decades. It is in our hands as citizens. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, for sharing the importance of solar energy and especially in all its forms. I now request our next speaker, Dr. Ishita Ghoshal, to please share her views on lifestyle with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aditi. Good evening, everyone. Extremely pleased to be a part of such an interesting conversation, which is completely a necessity of the hour. I would like to start by quoting a report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which states that behavior, lifestyle, and culture have a considerable influence on energy use and the associated emissions, and that stabilizing or lowering consumption and transitioning towards a shared economy structure, and along with that adopting a lot of other behavioral changes, has an extremely high potential to mitigate the kind of issues that the world is facing today. Now, we have heard from the previous speakers about the current scenario and what is being done all in the country as well as all across the world. What we invariably need in a war footing is a change in the lifestyle in the economy so that we can move towards a low carbon economy. Now, when we talk about an economy at large, the two main entities that we focus on are, on one hand, the consumers, and on the other hand, the producers. What we need is a lifestyle change coming from both these sides equally aggressively. The most important trouble here is the scarcity of resources. And every economic unit, be it a consumer or a producer, what they try to do at the end of the day is optimize on whatever, based on whatever is available in front of them. And based on that, they take a decision about either consumption requirements or production needs. Now, what we need is the idea of being sentimental about the issues that we are talking about here. We need that to enter into the optimization problem that each and every of these economic units actually utilize to formulate their decisions. And not necessarily that people are doing this consciously, right? But subconsciously, they are ideally optimizing based on certain constraints that they face, right? So in this process, the idea is how we can incorporate the need to move away from fossil fuel and move towards renewable energy. Now, in this, there have been quite a few groups of people who have suggested how the pricing of energy plays such an important role, both from the producers' end as well as the consumers' end. So, from the producer side, they are not really interested to move away from the current reliance on coal simply because of the pricing. That has been the case so far. So then a strategy to actually price use of carbon is something that has been suggested, and there are different groups of people who feel towards it and against it, and then that's still under contemplation. But when we look at it from the consumer perspective, and particularly in a country like ours, the majority of the population need to be able to have access to affordable clean energy, right? And that is the challenge here. We see a lot of countries where UNDP has come across in kind of increasing the energy efficiency, right? In motor lighting or all sorts of industries. So those kind of things need to be incorporated when it comes to the producer side of the economy. Um, just this year, the Solar Energy Corporation of India has actually given out contracts for quite a substantial capacity for the supply of renewable energy along with storage. And if we can commercialize on this and if we can make it grow, then clearly this source of renewable power is, along with storage, is going to turn out to be cheaper than the current forms, right? And so there is a possibility or a strategy that might come into place where we can say that actually put a halt on construction of new thermal power plants and redirect the interest of the overall economy towards these kind of resources. Now, when we talk about the producer side is comparatively still restricted, but more we want to concentrate on the consumption side. But still, to talk about the producer side a little bit, using of greener inputs in their production process, right? So because there also it's a question of optimizing with whatever cost structure they are facing and the kind of product pricing that they need to keep in mind. So if cheaper and efficient sources of renewable energy can be incorporated in the production process itself, that kind of a change would be something that we are looking forward to. More intensive use of the capital stock that is currently available, so then reusing and recycling of the inputs is something that should help in this case. The production side should also be able to produce efficient, green, and cheaper outputs, right? I think Priya was talking about affordability, and that becomes one of the core issues when you talk about why not people are using product A instead of using product B, even though it's supposed to be environmental friendly. One of the biggest challenges has been affordability. So we need to take care of that. So produce those products at a rate, at a price that would automatically push consumers towards that. Commercialization of clean energy technologies is something that we really have to think of in our war footing. One of the studies that I was a part of, a project that we did, where we were looking at developing transition economies and developed economies, these three groups of countries, where we realized that energy consumption has a negative impact on GDP growth when it comes to the developing and transition economies, as opposed to a positive impact with the developed economies. So clearly that distinction is arising from the fact that the way we are consuming, what kind of energy we are consuming, right? So that needs to change. When we come to the consumption side and the lifestyle changes that would be required to achieve a low carbon economy, it requires a more fundamental change within day-to-day life practices, right? Although it may not require necessarily always a financial outlay, but still, just because people are used to being in a particular way or using particular kind of products and services, they simply end up doing that. When it comes to particularly countries like ours, where we have seen a decent enough growth rate and good chunks of people keep on moving from lower income groups to higher income groups, that kind of increases the consumption demand like anything, to no end. And reducing that consumption level is one of the biggest challenges. Here, a lot of herd mentality and herd behavior also comes into play. Now, the main ways in which we can do this, one is that we need to target overconsumption, right? A shift is required from the kind of consumption that we are doing. So if you look at the consumption expenditure, maybe keep the expenditure at where it is, but transfer your nature of expenditure towards more renewable energy utilizing products. Consuming of more green products. So for example, if like in our daily lives, let's say for cooking, if the economy can see a move towards electric cooking, right? But for that, automatically you would need efficient and affordable equipments that can be utilized in the household on a day-to-day basis. Vehicles is something that is the number and the contribution to pollution is staggering. So if we can push people towards using more of electric vehicles, but along with that, what comes in is a simultaneous investment in infrastructure that would be able to support this kind of a movement in consumption. So in our country also, we have had, availability is there, affordability also to a great extent. But what comes in the way of using electric vehicles is, let's say, the charging stations. If I were to drive overnight to some place, I really don't know whether I would, my car would just stop in the midway and there would be no way that I would be able to charge my car. So I get stranded in the middle of the road. I don't want to take those kind of risks. And hence, a more trustworthy alternative is the kind of vehicles that we use right now. In home as well, moving towards more efficient lighting. What one of my co-panelists mentioned, that we have moved towards the variety, the more efficient variety, but then we have not effectively reduced the amount of consumption. So we need to consciously think of that. Efficient heating processes or cooling processes, right? We talk about using refrigerators or air conditions. So many times the cost effectiveness also comes into play here. So we need to move away from that. So for example, if someone is buying an AC, a 5-star rated AC would clearly cost a little more. But what we also need to keep in mind is that over the years, my electricity bill is going to be much lesser. So then that balancing out, like I think Anupam was talking about this, that how we think about just today and tomorrow, and we're not thinking about the future. That is the mindset that we need to get into. Also using existing products in more efficient way, right? How we can reuse and recycle. Right? That is what we need to look at very carefully, and we need to move towards that. That's what we should be thinking about day and night. The benefits of doing this, of course, would be that we would be moving towards saving resources, which are already in scarcity. The production and consumption from both sides, cost effectiveness is going to come in. So with that, one of the greatest benefits that would be is we, particularly in a country of like ours, where we have a large population which are from a particular income group. So with the affordable, accessible resources of this sort, the income, the real income is going to be higher, and hence their quality of life, as they would perceive it, would be comparatively better. We would be moving towards a healthier economy, more productive labor force, and that's what is going to take the economy ahead. The sustainability of the economy counts on that, relies on that. So the health expenditure that a country like ours accrues in today's day and age, be it at an individual level or at the national level, that can be taken care of to a great extent. At the same time, what we also need to think about while we are looking at these lifestyle changes is how this kind of a lifestyle change would impact the existing industries and the employment that it brings thereof. So a continuous training and skilling and reskilling of labor is also essential, that we cannot simply let those people be and just tell them, now you go figure how you want to earn your living. So we need to be able to, as we move from the fossil fuel industries towards a renewable energy kind of industry, we need to be able to absorb these labor, along with, of course, employing.
Yeah, ma'am, it's 12 minutes.
Yes, I'll just finish. Um, yes, the last point then that I would mention here is, keeping in mind that we're talking about a lifestyle change, it's a behavioral change that needs to happen. And in this, probably one of the way ahead would be the nudge effect, right? We can actually try to nudge people to direct the herd behavior towards a low carbon economy, and simultaneously bringing up commodity infrastructure with cost effectiveness and affordability. That is what is the way forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for an overview of all the economic factors that could be considered while making this transition. And now request Dr. Gurudas Nulkar to please share his views on ecosystems and restoration. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'll just start by sharing the screen. Tell me when my screen is visible to you.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
It's visible, right? Okay. Right. Thank you so much. And thanks to Pune International Center, Dr. Amitabh Malik, and the entire team for inviting me for this. It's a pleasure to be here, especially with the elite panel that I've already listened to. So I'll be talking a little bit about the connection of of nature, especially ecology, biodiversity, with the economy. And that's why I have said that, is it sustainable development? Is this an oxymoron, or is this actually a call for action? The flow of my presentation would be like this. I'll talk first about climate change, the economic problem. So I'll just a couple of slides to establish that it is indeed an economic problem. Then I'll talk a little bit about sustainable development, the concept of sustainable development, and what's wrong with it, or what are the limitations of it. Then I'll talk about nature and economy, and finally social and ecological cost of carbon, ending with the new economy. So the economic problem, I think we are all aware of that, and especially the audience here, the August audience, which is here, would already know this table, which talks about the greenhouse gases and the global warming potential that they hold. Right. So, and the important point which I wanted to show here was not the greenhouse gases, but the fact which is beautifully depicted by this graphic made by World Resources Institute, which shows that the reasons of greenhouse gas emissions are all in the economic activities of human beings. Right? So transportation, electricity, heat, buildings, all of these are contributing to CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, all of these kind of greenhouse gases, which are actually warming the global temperature. So I would encourage you to look at the left-hand side of the screen, which is about transportation, electricity, heat, buildings, manufacturing, emissions, agriculture, land use, forestry, so on and so forth. And now my next slide will only show you the growth of economic activities on the planet. So right from 1990 till about 2015, this chart is capturing all the economic progress in terms of a single digit, which is called the gross domestic product, GDP of the world. So the world economy is growing at a fantastic rate, especially in the last couple of decades. And all this is contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions, which are also the cause of the global warming. So sustainable development, the concept of sustainable development is deeply rooted first in the social forestry practices and managing of renewable natural resources, essentially the forest as well as fisheries, where the term was introduced. But more importantly, this term actually was finalized and crystallized by the Brundtland Commission, which says sustainable development is that development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet that. And the biggest problem here in this definition is what comprises of needs. Right? An electric fan in Mumbai is a need or a necessity, but it may be a luxury in a very remote village of India where the farmer does not own even 1 acre of land and he doesn't have any source of income other than agriculture. So the entire concept of needs is open for interpretation, and that creates a huge problem, because every country, every nation has interpreted needs in a different way, and the affluent nations do not want to compromise the lifestyles of their citizens, which was very clearly said by George Bush in one of the Earth summits. So this being the case, we have today managed to extract the 17 SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, based on this, and they are pretty much catering to what comprises of needs and what would not be needs. Especially, I would like to draw your the attention to SDG 12, which is about sustainable consumption and production. So that's a very important SDG, which is not given as much importance as the others. Eradicating poverty, eradicating hunger, all of these SDGs are given a lot of importance, renewable energy, but sustainable consumption, nobody talks about reducing consumption, especially energy. Nobody talks about reducing the consumption of energy. We can substitute energy with renewable energy, we can substitute A with B, all that is fine. But what about the amount of energy that we are consuming today? Can that really be substituted with renewable forms of energy? And second is that especially corporations are narrowly interpreting the word sustainable development with a growth in material well-being. And material well-being, as you would agree with me, is all related to consumption-driven growth. So the more appliances I have, the bigger house I have, is actually leading to a material well-being to me, which is also what sustainable development is narrowly interpreted by some sections of the society. And this race is still on is very evident from the fact that everybody still cares so much for the GDP, in spite of Simon Kuznets saying it right back in 1944 that do not use it beyond the Great Depression. Right? And yet we are fascinated by this. So let's look at what do we take in the economy from nature. And there are essentially four things which are critical for any and every economy to function. On the right hand side is the economy, which I'm representing with this World Resources Institute visual, and on the left hand side I'm showing that first and foremost we use a lot of non-renewable resources. We use metals, minerals, fossil fuels, so on and so forth, which are non-renewable. Well, non-renewable in human time scale. Fossil fuel is indeed renewable in the geologic time scale, but we'll have to wait for a couple of million years for it to happen again. The renewable resources, which are a supply of fresh water, supply of air, supply of soil, all of these are, well, soil also is not renewable in a human time scale, but it takes a long while for that to happen. But we have a lot of renewable resources which come into the economy. Then we have the global public goods, which are essentially not owned by any one nation, but they are free for every human being. They are non-competitive, which means if I consume, somebody else can also consume that. And they are international waters, oceans, atmosphere, so on and so forth. And finally, ecosystem services, which are the services rendered by nature, which are absolutely free to all human beings, all nations, all economies. They are the services of the hydrological cycle, the carbon cycle, pollination, seed dispersal, forest regeneration, forest irrigation, all of that which is happening, which is sustaining the life-sustaining capacity of the planet. So now if you look at the economy, how is economy responding to this? Economy is responding to this in a very, very traditional neo-capitalistic fashion, which is it is valuing it on extrinsic value, which is the human value to it. And that means that it is the scarcity value in the market economy. So when I'm paying 80 rupees a kilo for stainless steel or for mild steel, it means that the 80 rupees per kilo is the price decided by the demand and supply, and of course some other factors. But by and large, in a free market economy, it is influenced by the demand and supply of the material. So all of these things, including energy, including fossil fuel, including steel, all the natural resources are valued on extrinsic valuation. Now that creates a problem, because the extrinsic value is not the same as intrinsic value, which is the value in nature. Value of that resource being in that place at that time, value of the free-flowing river, value of those predators being there in agricultural fields, value of the tiger being there in the Sundarbans, all of them have a value in nature, and they are adding to the ecosystem services. So this extrinsic value of nature is dependent upon the food chain, the food web, the habitats for organisms, the components of the ecosystems, elements of nature services, all of these which are actually the ignored valuation. And this part is what is bestowing the life sustaining capacity of the planet. So this is the single most value which we need to be bothered about in sustainable development, because that is very closely related to social development, social prosperity, social health, all of those things which matter in sustainable development. So what's happening in the current economy, the non-renewable resources, we are over-extracting, the renewable resources, we are polluting, the global public goods, there is unrestricted use, nobody cares about it. It's a tragedy of the commons, which Garrett Hardin had said way back in 1971, the ecosystem services which are completely ignored in the economy. So over extraction, scarcity pushes up the prices, and the most vulnerable communities, the poorest of the poor in the country, are no longer able to afford a lot of commodities because the scarcity valuation has pushed the pricing up. On the other hand, pollution is, the manufacturers are not paying for the pollution, the consumers are not paying for the pollution. If I buy a car, I'm not paying for the smoke that I'm generating over the life of the car. I'm not paying for the problem which has occurred in the Gulf of Khambat because I've extracted the fossil fuel so that my car can run. So this is paid by the taxpayers' money. This is paid by a weakened immunity of the society. Delhi, the High Court, the Supreme Court had to intervene in Delhi last winter and say that you are not managing your air properly. You've got to do that, otherwise we will have to take some cognizance of it. So this is paid by a weakened immunity. Look at COVID-19 kind of diseases, Zika, SARS, MERS, swine flu. All of these diseases have moved from the animal community into human communities only for the reason that their natural habitat is gone, or their food chain is broken, or their food web has weakened, and it is safer for them to regenerate and grow within human systems. So weakened immunity, and so pollution is, the price of pollution is that. And finally, unrestricted use of global public goods and ignorance of ecosystem services is leading to habitat loss, species loss, biodiversity loss, all of this which we already know about. The social and ecological costs of carbon, look what happens just to 4 of these things: weather, water, food, and ecosystem. What happens if there is a 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, 4 degree, 5 degree rise, right? So as the temperature rises, the intensity of storms, intensity of droughts and forest fires is going to increase. We have seen forest fires in Australia, in California, we have seen droughts in Konkan, on the west coast of India, which was not getting any kinds of cyclone, Nisarga cyclone, Fian, continuously they've been increasing. Water, the glacial melt is going to be higher at about 1.5 degrees centigrade. It will lead to disruption of water supply in some areas. There will be threats to farming in a lot of areas, and sea level is going to rise with inundation of land. Now that land is going to be completely gone from our hand if inundation happens. Food systems, there are yields which are going to increase in some places. For example, Ladakh is today getting more rainfall than it was getting 50 years back. And people in Ladakh do not know how to respond to it. They've started doing agriculture. So the yields there have increased. But in many places, the falling crop yields is evident. So there is inundation of land. There are fields which are laid back because of higher rains. All of that is happening. Ecosystems, extensive damage to coral reefs is something which we have been noticing since the last couple of decades. Loss of biodiversity, loss of ecological services, all of this is happening there. And where is this coming from? The government is going to spend on this, which means the government is going to pay for all of this from the tax collection. That means the net welfare spending of the government is going to reduce dramatically. Whatever money is going to be spent, a large amount is already being spent on defense, and even larger amount is going to be spent on mitigation of natural calamities and ecological breakdown. And this is going to reduce the social welfare spending dramatically because the government will not have money. Look at what has happened to Maharashtra today. The government is coming out and saying we do not have money to spend on social welfare because we are diverting a lot of funds to hospitals. So, again, the last part I want to show is about the 5 capitals which are eroded. The first one is the natural capital, the natural resources. So the Nisarga cyclone, which has happened in Konkan, has destroyed pristine forests, has changed river banks, has done so many things which are essential to agriculture and the economy. The human capital is reduced. The knowledge and skills which used to be in play in Adivasi communities before the COVID or before the cyclone Nisarga came are no longer useful today. Social capital, institutions that enable social prosperity are breaking down. Trust, the migrant workers of Mumbai are no longer trusting their employers. There is a breakdown in the network, breakdown in the shared values. Your value is different from my value. Material goods which contribute to the economy and well-being. That is what government measures essentially. And finally, the most important thing which government measures is the financial capital, which really has no real value. It is just a representation of the natural, social, human, and manufactured capital, right? So we are fixating upon our attention upon the financial capital, which is happening here. So the economic growth is leading to global warming. I think most of the economists have already agreed, but they still do not capture the entire extent of this. What happens when the hydrological cycle breaks down, or the forest regeneration, invasive species. So this is actually going to be a cyclical form, which means what I want to argue is maintaining the ecological value of nature is critical for economic growth. This is something which we must acknowledge in our economy. So in the new economy, what happens? We have to break down sustainable development into two components. What must be developed? Social institutions, education, healthcare, inequality, and what must be sustained? Natural systems, food systems, and social systems. These are the essentially two things that we are going to look at. So the last part, 2 minutes more, Aditi.
So 2 minutes is good.
Yeah, okay. So improving the quality of life, creating equitable material conditions, frugal use of natural resources, and minimizing waste generations, and maintaining Earth's capacity to sustain life. This could be our new definition of sustainable development, right? And for that, we have various things: valuation and accounting of natural resources and ecosystem services, minimizing externalized cost, moving to a circular economy, servitization of products, which is happening in some places, promoting barter economy. Now, barter economy and subsistence economy are two very, very ignored things in economic thing, because why do we want everybody to come into monetary economics? That's not the way out. There is no inflation in barter economy, and that's really something which is useful. Removing the information asymmetry. Dr. Ishita talked about imperfect markets. Now, one of the reasons why the markets are imperfect, because the information is not complete. I do not know what is the water footprint of the product I'm buying, or I do not know what is the carbon footprint of the product I'm buying. Localization instead of globalization. Today we are creating monopolies which are giant. Facebook and Google are exceeding a lot of GDPs of the entire world. Sustainable agriculture. And if there is one thing we need to be Atmanirbhar in, it's in agriculture. We are buying our imports, we are buying our tractors from US. All of this is happening, and that's not contributing towards the sustainable development at all. Yeah, so with that, I'm ending. I think I've overrun my time by a little bit, so I had to be a little quick. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful view on the complex systems which you are trying to address, and sorry for the time constraint. I now request Professor Amitav Malik to share his concluding remarks and his views on this topic. Thank you.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The only thing I can say is, wow, what a wonderful discussion of by four important panelists, and what different rich views and understanding. I think we'll spend a few more days just consolidating all this information and putting it together. I will use 5 minutes just for a reference to an article that came out very recently by the Global Commission on Economy and Climate. Just to quote the numbers, I will not say anything more. It says 35 nations have already managed to grow their economies and reduce emissions simultaneously already. World Bank estimates pollutions in India are costing about $55 billion a year, and climate-related events across the globe in 2018 was total of 320 billion loss. So like that, there are many numbers. Globally, 87% of the cities, global cities, are in breach of the WHO air pollution guidelines, which means vast number of people are breathing dirty air, paying the price for it. Investing in low carbon solutions for the transport sector alone can save 2.8 gigatons of CO2 per year, and the benefit is equivalent to $10.5 trillion by 2050. Same thing can be done for the energy sector. Same thing can be done for the business and lifestyle changes. We would be looking at something like $30 trillion benefit by 2050. These are the numbers that are mind-boggling. Land use reforms can alone deliver 30% reduction in GHG emission. Stopping deforestation and restoring forests can remove 7 billion tons of CO2 by 2030, 10 years, equivalent to removing 1.5 billion cars from the road. Restoring 350 million hectares of degraded land could cost about 23 to 60 billion dollars, of course. But if we do that, the estimated economic benefit will be 170 billion dollars. That's the differential. So that is what we are coming to. So let me summarize by saying that it is very clear now, overall, like Priya brought out, that there is nothing that is impossible. We are talking about going zero fossil fuel by what year? It can be done maybe 10 or 20 years. Need not wait till 2050 or 2100. It is that kind of a situation where economists and environmentalists must come together to really define what can be done. So what we are looking at is a integrated climate economic policy that can drive the change and make things happen. Another interesting thing that came out in this publication, it says India's share of global environmental damage, whatever way it's calculated, it is 4 times the emission contribution share. But when it goes to the bigger ones, for the US, the damage is one half of its emission share, and for China, it is 1/4 of its emission share. How is it 4 times for India? There is something either not correct or something we have to think differently. Best economic practices of the future will have to be more climate resilient, sustainable, and equitable, because if you don't do that, the price to pay is very, very large. So I will not say anything more except to thank my wonderful distinguished panelists for bringing life to this discussion. A lot has happened, but before I end and ask Aditi to take over, Dr. Kelkar, if you are hearing me, would you like to share some thoughts? Dr. Vijay Kelkar?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, everybody can hear you. Thank you.
No, I just want to first congratulate each one of the panelists. It was extremely articulate and well argued presentations. I learned a lot. And only 2 remarks I want to give for consideration for Dr. Nulkar's very, very thoughtful presentation. That, the ways of breaking constraints societies or social systems are found out, one by trading. And somehow this we don't recognize adequate value, and its excessive Atmanirbharta will in fact create even more greater crisis for environment. So I think we must appreciate the human beings have worked out this what they call positive sum game, where everybody gains straight. So there's one, I think, important missing. At least I missed that, the mention of how it can be done. And second, of course, and I know I'm a bit biased, being in my earlier training an engineer, some of the technology discussion was missing, and I think the technology is moving very rapidly, and I personally believe that the objective we not even wait to, as Professor Malik said, 2100. Maybe it can come much earlier. And the first presentation by Professor Zaraf was essentially a new Malthusian kind of framework, and Malthus was wrong, and so is I think Club of Rome. And as a reason, both got a bit wrong because of technology. They missed the point that there is another issue of knowledge and science and technology. And I think I do believe that the way it is changing, the objectives which we have put to ourselves are probably, as Professor Malik said, I share his optimism, is doable. And last point I would mention is really, which is not adequately focused by, it was implied because the fact that we're holding this conference is itself attempt a direction, but much more create awareness and education. That's where I think our role is to increase the awareness of the issues, of underlying issues. So I'll stop at that, but I really enjoyed it. And I want to congratulate Professor Malik and his colleague, their colleagues, and all the four panelists. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Kelkar. Yes, we keep pushing with hope and optimism. Without that, there's nothing much. Before I hand over to Aditi, I would like to announce to everybody that on this subject only, we are going to organize a national conference. Maybe it will not be possible to be in person, but it will be again be online. But we'll try to organize a larger national conference within the next 2-3 months. So please join us and be part of the discussion. I also noticed that there are a huge number of questions. We may not be able to do justice to it, but I can assure you that myself and our ECC team will do justice by sending email responses to everyone. Worthwhile, good questions. So, Aditi, all yours. Back to you.
Thank you, sir. We will try to accommodate as many questions as we can, but with the time constraints, like sir said, we will definitely get back afterwards in case something is missed. Just in case you don't get a reply, please contact us on climatecollectivepune@gmail.com and we'll revert to you. My first question is to Dr. Anupam Saraf. The first question from the audience. In the process of dismantling existing systems and creating new system, would we not end up consuming more natural resources? And if you could answer whether the carbon budget which we have, if that will reduce because of this transition.
Well, excellent thought about what is the cost of changing infrastructure. That is not what I'm suggesting. It is globally indicated that we need to change the information and institutional mechanisms that we have, which have failed to check the immense growth of population. Very soon, the globe is going to be 10 billion. And very soon, we are going to be, if you look at the expansion of our energy demand, if you look at the expansion of our goods consumption, this is something which is growing exponentially. And it is extremely important for us to realize that the earth is a finite ball. The reason why billionaires like Musk and Bezos are talking about going into outer space is because, ultimately they talk about colonizing other planets is all because people recognize that the earth has only finite resources and we have already polluted enormous chunk of it. In the last 50 years, 60% of the biodiversity has disappeared. So it is important for us to recognize that we have seen serious consequences of whatever economic activity we have been undertaking with absolutely no regard for the home, the environment that houses this activity. So yeah, there are costs, but if you are simply changing information mechanisms which inform us and do not hide the signals that the environment gives us. I'll give you a very simple example to illustrate this. Because we have had technology allow us to cool our buildings, we have been completely ignoring the fact that we have removed from our surroundings the trees which used to naturally cool our environment. We have completely ignored the signal that we have paved almost 90% of the surfaces of all our cities, which we used to be in contact with the air and absorb the moisture from the rains in order to cool the earth. We have completely ignored the fact that it used to also allow this water to percolate into the groundwater and supply us with our water supply. So these information feedbacks which we actually had in the past, which we hid because we used technology and we said that, okay, technology will solve the problem. And therefore, yes, in the short run, things got better because suddenly Pune, which never required any even electric fans in the 1970s, started requiring fans in the 80s and 90s. And now we need air conditioners because we have created complete heat sinks. So we are, and therefore also if you look at the carbon emissions of Pune, which have really shot to the roof because of this very need for technology. The energy demand has increased exponentially. This is something which, if we don't contain, even if we talk about 40% renewables as the government of India is talking about, the total energy demand of India is growing at 8% per annum. So it's, the phenomenal doubling time is going to be very difficult to meet up with. 40%, we will still be bad off in 2030. We will be worse off than where we were today. So I think technology is something which is not going to be a solution, and it's already known, it's been seen over the last 30 years. So we need to make changes which are informational changes, institutional mechanism changes, the way we govern ourselves, the way we actually make sure that we don't hide the signals that the environment gives to us about reaching carrying capacity.
Thank you, sir. Next question is for Priya ma'am. What might be the mechanisms for deconstructing our energy system? So it's in continuation with what sir said, but would you like to add anything to the question?
Yeah, and I think the earlier question was also perhaps for me because I'm the one who talked about dismantling energy system.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you could add as
And
well.
yes, it is true that there will be cost, but material cost as well as energy cost involved with that. But it is because I referred to his famous book. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Am I audible? Yeah, because my screen suddenly froze. So Schumacher has said in his book Small is Beautiful that non-renewable resources should be used as a capital expense. So fossil energy that we have should be used for creating an infrastructure to harness renewable energy so that we can continue to use energy services going ahead. So 10-12 minutes is a very short time really to go into the fossil fuels sustainable and continuous manner, and that can happen with, so for example, you spend fossil fuels to make solar panels because the solar panel is going to give you energy for the next 10, 20, 30 years, whereas the same amount of fossil energy will only take you from point A to point B, and then that's the end of it if you used it for actually transporting yourself. So that's the difference there, that we do have whatever non renewable energy sources we have, let's spend them, let's cut those ropes so that we will have to then survive on renewable energy, but spend them on creating the infrastructure which will allow us to shift to 100% renewable energy. One point I cannot resist making, Dr. Anupam Saraf: population is a solved problem. We are going to be 10 billion, but that's where the population is stabilizing. So let's not worry too much about population now. The focus has to be rightly on reducing consumption, and that will happen if we are mindful of our needs, even though needs is an ambiguous word to use. So sufficiency, as I said, is the way to go rather than just efficiency, which is what technology brings in. But sufficiency requires technology to be aligned with mindful use of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll ask a common question, and the whichever panelist would like to answer it, it would be nice, even if we get two or three views. What is the relevance of political economy in ensuring that affordable and clean products are actually taken up more than the ones currently subsidized by government, like food? Should I repeat the question?
Yes, can you repeat that? I didn't quite
Okay.
catch.
What is the relevance of political economy or changing the political scenario to ensure that the affordable and clean products which get produced will be prioritized over the existing ones which have subsidies, or which are subsidized or which are encouraged, like for example use of coal? So like, can there be any drivers or are there any signs which are visible for this transition?
Should I
Yes,
start by
please,
making a few?
please, please.
Thank you for taking me. So while I was speaking, of course, 10 to 12 minutes is a very short time. But then one of the points that I really wanted to focus on was how investment is going to be extremely crucial in making this change, right? So when we talk about incentivizing production processes towards renewable energy sources, and also reduction of consumption, and moving of the direction of consumption towards a greener product, um, this is going to be actually promoted very much by the direction of investment that the economy sees. So then, in that sense, there's a huge role for the governments to play here. I also touched upon slightly about the nudge effects, right? We have seen the government take up a lot of other nudging points, and we have seen how those programs have worked really well. All the social programs that we have in our country. So a similar requirement is there, right? So we need to talk more about it. We need to reach out to people more and more, um, and investment from the central or decentralized, whichever case it may be. We need those investments to happen so that it becomes smoother, both for the producers as well as the consumers, to actually find it more effective and cost effective, particularly to take up these options.
Thank you.
Dr. Gurudas, the question was about political economy and the role of subsidy. Perhaps you can do some justice.
Yes, sir. I think I was just itching to say something about the political economy. And of course, we all know that there is something gravely wrong with the current democratic system. And the way the politicians and the bureaucrats work hand in hand. The bureaucrats are essentially for long-term thinking and decision making, and the politicians are essentially for a 5-year term period. So this 5-year term period, what is it that they can show in their achievement is GDP growth. Right? So, and that becomes the single focus of most politicians, why GDP growth is so easy. It's a low hanging fruits. It's easy to measure quarter on quarter, so on and so forth. But the bureaucrats are very well entrenched into the hands of the politician. That therein lies the problem. However, I'm not going to talk too much about the democracy and its problem. It's more important to understand that for the new economy, what is more of a barrier is the centralization which is created by political economy. And today, we actually need to move from a centralized economy to a completely decentralized economy, not just as an economy, but also as a means of governance, as a means of waste management, as a means of energy generation. You know what Priya has been saying, why generate electricity in one place and distribute it all over India? Why not have decentralized rooftop like Pune Carbon Neutral Pune report says? All of this is about decentralization. And would the current political economy allow decentralization? That is the fear which we have. Right. So that should be what the citizen should be aiming at, that we want more decentralization. The Adivasis of Niyamgiri should be able to manage their own natural resources. Why should somebody in Delhi talk about what they should do about it? So this becomes a fundamental understanding in sustainable development, I think.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Uh, we have more questions, but given the time constraints, I think we should stop here. And just before closing, I would like to share the results of the polls, because the most positive outcome is that majority of the people think that environmentalists and economists are sane and not crazy. So it's time people start listening to them. Second point is that do you think we should make a transition to green economy in this decade? 90% of the 100 people who voted say we should. Whether green technologies are economically feasible today, the consensus is that it will take some time for them to become feasible. And where they are already feasible, I think it's upon the people who are into this system to make ensure that people know what the feasibility and what the how accessible these systems are. For the next question was, should companies with higher polluting activities be charged more? And 72% people agree with this. So we can take this up and ensure that this actually translates into some policy decisions. And last but not the least, even though city people are considered irresponsible, assuming most of the people attending this are from the cities, 88% think that cities should develop in a carbon neutral way. So I think we learned a lot from the audience and our speakers tonight. I thank Professor Malik, Dr. Saraf, Dr. Karve, Dr. Ghoshal, and Dr. Nulkar for sharing so much information and wisdom with us, and making this event such a uh, thought-provoking one. I would like to thank our President Dr. Mashelkar and Vice President Dr. Kelkar for their encouragement, and all the PIC staff for organizing this event. I thank our team members Siddharth Bhagwat, Prithviraj Lingayat, Rasika Natsankar, and Amresh Kesari for hosting this session and helping us all with the smooth event. I thank all the attendees for joining us today. We look forward to more interaction and action on climate change together. Thank you. We will conclude the session for today.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
PIC and all the organizers.